The day they laughed at the old janitor was the day they learned who had once carried an entire fleet on his shoulders. The grand hall of the Orion Naval Academy shimmered beneath thousands of suspended lights, their pale glow reflecting off polished steel floors so clean they looked like frozen silver. Cadets from more than 20 worlds filled the massive chamber, their dress uniforms crisp, their medals gleaming, their conversations blending into a low current of excitement that rolled beneath the vaulted ceiling. Graduation day always felt larger than life. Careers would begin today. Futures would change today. Heroes, at least in their own minds, would be born today. Along the far edge of the hall, almost invisible among the preparations, Ethan Walker pushed a maintenance cart across the floor. The wheels rattled softly over expansion joints in the metal decking. His gray uniform carried no rank insignia, no awards, no symbols of achievement, just a faded academy patch stitched over his chest. At 41 years old, he looked older than that. Strands of silver threaded through his sandy blonde hair. Fine lines rested at the corners of his eyes, the kind of lines earned through years of responsibility rather than age alone. He moved slowly, methodically, adjusting chairs that were already perfectly aligned and wiping fingerprints from surfaces nobody else noticed. Most people barely looked at him. That was normal. Ethan preferred it that way. A burst of laughter echoed from nearby. For cadets stood beside one of the ceremonial platforms. Their uniforms identified them as top graduates, future officers, future commanders. One of them spotted Ethan and smirked. "Hey, janitor," the young man called. "Missed a spot." His friends laughed. Ethan glanced toward the floor. "Thanks," he said calmly. "I'll check it." More laughter followed. Another cadet nudged his friend. "Careful, he might write you up." The group erupted again. Ethan simply nodded and continued pushing the cart. Not angry, not embarrassed, just quiet. Across the hall, Commander Lyra Voss watched the exchange while reviewing ceremony schedules on her tablet. Her blue skin reflected the white overhead lighting, giving her an almost metallic appearance. She frowned slightly, not because the cadets were unusually cruel. They weren't. Young officers often confused confidence with wisdom. What bothered her was Ethan's reaction. Most people showed something when mocked. Irritation, pride, hurt. Ethan showed nothing at all. He kept moving, kept working, as though their opinions carried no weight. The ceremony countdown flashed across the main display. 30 minutes remaining. Cadets filed toward their assigned sections. Families filled observation balconies above. The Academy Orchestra began tuning instruments. Ethan stopped near the center aisle and knelt beside a damaged lighting strip embedded in the floor. A tiny maintenance panel clicked open beneath his fingers. He studied the circuitry for a moment before making a small adjustment. The light immediately returned to full brightness. He closed the panel and stood. One of the cadets who had mocked him earlier noticed. "Looks like he finally found something he's qualified to do." More laughter. Ethan offered a small smile. "Looks that way." The answer somehow made them laugh even harder. Lyra shook her head and returned to her schedule. Yet something lingered in her thoughts. She had served in military command long enough to recognize people. Real people. The ones who carried hidden stories behind ordinary faces. Ethan Walker never acted like someone defeated by life. He acted like someone who had already seen things more important than whatever happened inside this academy. The orchestra fell silent. Final preparations began. Ethan guided his maintenance cart toward a service corridor at the edge of the hall. Before disappearing through the doorway, he paused briefly and looked toward the enormous academy crest suspended above the stage. For just a second, something changed in his expression. Not sadness, not pride, recognition, like a man looking at an old photograph nobody else remembered. Then the moment vanished. He lowered his eyes and continued into the corridor. Behind him, the cadets laughed one final time. None of them noticed the elderly admiral seated alone in the highest observation balcony. None of them noticed how the admiral's gaze followed the janitor. And none of them noticed the old officer slowly rise to his feet as Ethan disappeared from view. The people who carry the heaviest memories are usually the ones nobody notices. The graduation ceremony ended beneath a storm of applause. Families embraced newly commissioned officers. Cameras flashed across the enormous hall. Academy banners drifted slowly from the ceiling as music echoed through the structure's vast steel framework. Commander Lyra Voss stood near the stage reviewing departure schedules while thousands of guests streamed toward transport terminals. Yet her attention kept drifting elsewhere, toward a service corridor near the Eastern Maintenance Wing, toward a man who had already disappeared, 2 hours later, the academy finally grew quiet. The celebration noise faded into distant echoes. Cleaning drones emerged from storage alcoves. Automated sweepers glided silently across the polished floors. Most staff had already gone home. Ethan Walker remained. He pushed his maintenance cart through a deserted corridor illuminated by rows of soft white utility lights. The academy felt different at night. Larger. Older. The endless hallways seemed to breathe beneath the hum of power conduits hidden behind the walls. Ethan preferred these hours. No crowds. No ceremonies. No attention. Just work. He stopped beside a malfunctioning air circulation unit. The panel had been reporting faults for 3 weeks. 3 technicians had submitted repair requests. Ethan opened the housing with a simple handheld tool and studied the system. His blue eyes moved across the circuitry for only a few seconds before he located the problem. A damaged regulator. Slightly warped. Barely visible. 10 minutes later, the system restarted smoothly. The indicator light turned green. Ethan closed the panel and continued down the corridor. Nobody would know who fixed it. Nobody would ask. That was fine with him. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the academy, Lyra sat inside her office overlooking the central parade grounds. The giant windows framed a view of docking towers reaching into the night sky. Cargo shuttles crossed the darkness like glowing insects. She should have been finishing reports. Instead, she found herself searching personnel archives. Ethan Walker. Maintenance Division. Employment duration, 14 years. No disciplinary actions. No promotions requested. No family contacts listed. No military service record attached. Nothing unusual. Nothing remarkable. Yet the absence of information felt stranger than information itself. Most academy employees left digital footprints everywhere. Certifications. Training records. Personal history. Ethan's file felt carefully empty, as though entire chapters had been removed. Lyra leaned back in her chair. Something about the janitor bothered her. Not because he seemed suspicious. Because he seemed familiar. She simply could not explain why. Several floors below, Ethan entered his living quarters. The room measured barely 300 square feet. A narrow bed. A metal desk. A kitchenette. Nothing more. The space resembled temporary housing rather than a permanent home. He set his maintenance cart aside and removed his work gloves. The room remained silent except for the faint vibration of distant engines from the Academy spaceport. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and stared toward a storage case tucked beneath the desk. Black. Unmarked. Locked. Most people would have forgotten it existed. Ethan had not opened it in years. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. Then he pulled it free and placed it on the desk. Dust covered the surface. His fingers brushed it away. The lock released with a quiet click. Inside rested several objects wrapped carefully in dark cloth. Old photographs. Faded identification cards. Medals. More medals than any ordinary person could earn in a lifetime. Ethan stared at them without expression. Not pride. Not regret. Something quieter. Something heavier. His hand paused above a silver command insignia worn smooth by time. Then he closed the case again. Immediately. Almost as if reopening those memories had been a mistake. Outside his window, Academy lights stretched across the horizon like stars trapped on the ground. Ethan returned the case beneath the desk and turned off the room lights. Darkness filled the small apartment. Across the Academy, Commander Lyra Voss continued searching records long after midnight. Neither of them knew it yet. But before another day passed, a forgotten name was about to surface for the first time in 20 years. Names do not truly disappear. They simply wait for someone curious enough to uncover them. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of silver clouds drifting across the Academy's transparent atmospheric dome. Sunlight filtered through layers of reinforced crystal, casting long geometric shadows across the central parade grounds. Thousands of cadets had already departed after graduation, leaving the campus strangely quiet. Commander Lyra Voss stepped into the strategic archives shortly after 7 o'clock. The archive occupied an entire level beneath the administration tower. Endless rows of data cores stretched into the distance, illuminated by soft blue indicator lights. Most officers never visited this section. The records stored here dated back centuries. Wars, treaties, explorers, fleet commanders, forgotten heroes. Lyra approached a terminal and entered a single search query. Ethan Walker. The system immediately returned the same empty personnel profile she had already seen. Maintenance employee. 14 years. No military history. No notable records. Lyra frowned. Then she noticed something unusual. At the bottom of the screen sat a tiny access notation. Restricted historical cross-reference detected. Her pulse quickened slightly. That message should not have appeared on an ordinary janitor's file. She opened the notation. Access denied. Security clearance insufficient. Lyra stared at the warning for several seconds. Whatever was hidden had been classified far above her command level. That alone made no sense. She requested authorization through command channels. The denial arrived almost instantly. Request rejected. No explanation. No reason. Just rejection. That answer only made her more determined. Several hours later, she found herself reviewing old Academy yearbooks and archived photographs. Most searches led nowhere. Then suddenly she stopped. A photograph from 22 years earlier appeared on the screen. The image showed a group of young fleet officers standing beside a newly commissioned cruiser. Lyra's breath caught. One face looked familiar. Younger. Stronger. Wearing a captain's uniform instead of maintenance coveralls. Ethan Walker. The name beneath the photograph confirmed it. Captain Ethan Walker. Fleet Operations Command. Lyra leaned forward. Her heart accelerated. She opened the attached records. The file vanished. Deleted. Not restricted. Not classified. Deleted entirely. Someone had erased it. Every trace. Every achievement. Every assignment. Yet the photograph remained. A ghost trapped between systems. Meanwhile, across campus, Ethan repaired a damaged cargo lift near Docking Bay 12. The hydraulic system emitted a steady metallic groan as he worked. His hands moved with practiced precision. Wrenches clicked softly against steel housing. The lift returned to operation within minutes. A dock supervisor thanked him before hurrying away. Ethan nodded and returned his tools to the cart. Nothing about his expression suggested concern. Nothing suggested he knew someone was digging through his past. Back inside the archives, Lyra continued searching. Hours passed. Dead ends piled up. Then she found a reference hidden inside an old tactical training manual. The document described one of the most influential fleet maneuvers ever taught at the Academy. Every officer studied it. Every cadet memorized it. The Walker Containment Strategy. Lyra stared at the name. Walker. Her eyes moved slowly toward the attached author credit. Commander Ethan Walker. For several seconds, she simply sat there in silence. Every officer in the Alliance knew that strategy. It had saved entire colonies during the border crisis. It remained required curriculum even now. Yet nobody ever spoke about the man who created it. Lyra suddenly understood why the elderly admiral had stood when Ethan left the hall. The old officer had recognized him. He had known exactly who he was. A chill ran through her. Not fear. Realization. Somewhere inside this academy, pushing a maintenance cart through quiet corridors, worked a man whose name had once been taught in every military classroom in the Alliance. And someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure nobody remembered. History rarely remembers the people who accepted blame. It remembers the event and forgets the cost. Commander Lyra Voss spent the next day chasing fragments. Every official record led to a wall. Every inquiry disappeared into classified archives. Yet the deeper she searched, the stranger the pattern became. Ethan Walker had not simply vanished from military history. He had been carefully removed from it. Late that afternoon, Lyra sat alone inside a restricted research chamber reserved for senior command staff. Rain tapped softly against the Academy dome overhead, while archive projectors filled the dark room with pale blue light. An elderly records specialist had quietly pointed her toward a collection of declassified historical news feeds. Most officers ignored them. Lyra did not. She began reviewing reports from 20 years earlier. The border crisis. The largest humanitarian emergency in modern Alliance history. Colony worlds had faced catastrophic supply failures. Millions of civilians were stranded across remote systems. Entire shipping lanes collapsed under the strain. Fleet commanders argued endlessly about resource allocation. Every decision carried consequences. Every route saved one population while delaying aid to another. Then she found the name. Ethan Walker. At the time, he had commanded Task Force 7. A rising officer. Decorated. Respected. Considered one of the most promising strategic minds in the Alliance. Lyra continued reading. The reports described a single decision that changed everything. A transport corridor near the Black Nebula had become unstable. Military advisors recommended immediate withdrawal. Fleet analysts predicted enormous risks. Political leaders demanded caution. Ethan disagreed. According to the reports, he ordered emergency supply convoys through the corridor anyway. The operation succeeded. Entire colony populations received life-saving resources. Families survived. Settlements endured. Yet the corridor itself suffered severe infrastructure losses during the effort. Public reaction became divided almost overnight. Some called him a hero. Others called him reckless. Political leaders searched for someone to blame for the damage. Eventually, the blame settled on one man, Ethan Walker. Lyra sat back in silence. The more she read, the more disturbing the story became. Internal communications revealed that multiple senior officials privately supported Ethan's decision. Yet when criticism arrived, nobody defended him publicly. Nobody stepped forward. The reports ended abruptly. Career terminated. Records sealed. Public appearances ceased. Then nothing. 20 years of silence. Lyra stared at the final image attached to the archive. It showed a younger Ethan standing before reporters. No anger. No excuses. No attempt to defend himself. The transcript beneath the image contained only one statement. If accepting responsibility helps the Alliance move forward, then I accept it. That was all. No speeches. No accusations. No bitterness. Just acceptance. Lyra felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent years around ambitious officers. People who protected their reputations at all costs. Ethan had done the opposite. He had allowed history to place the burden on his shoulders and then quietly disappeared. Across the academy, Ethan spent the evening repairing weather sensors near the outer training fields. Wind swept across the grounds as clouds drifted beneath the dome's artificial atmosphere systems. He tightened a mounting bracket and checked calibration readings. The work was simple, predictable, peaceful. A group of cadets passed nearby without recognizing him. Ethan barely noticed. For him, the moment had long since passed. The arguments, the headlines, the blame, all of it belonged to another life. Yet far beyond the academy, drifting through the darkness between stars, an old encrypted military network suddenly activated. A forgotten archive request had triggered automated alerts buried deep within Alliance systems. Ancient recognition protocols began scanning records, searching names, cross-referencing identities. And somewhere aboard a distant flagship, an alert appeared on a command screen. The name displayed only 2 words. Ethan Walker. Sometimes the most dangerous moment is not when a crisis begins. It is when everyone assumes someone else will solve it. 3 days after Commander Lyra Voss uncovered the truth buried inside the archives, the Academy settled back into its normal rhythm. Training exercises resumed. Shuttle traffic returned to standard patterns. Cadets filled classrooms and simulators. The brief excitement of graduation had already faded into routine. Then, at 9:17 in the morning, every screen across the academy flashed amber. A warning tone echoed through corridors, hangars, lecture halls, and command offices. At first, nobody panicked. System alerts happened occasionally. Most were minor. A navigation relay, a communications outage, a sensor malfunction. But within minutes the warning changed from amber to red. Lyra looked up from her command desk as new data flooded her display. Her stomach tightened immediately. Long-range monitoring stations had detected a massive gravitational anomaly forming near the primary shipping corridor that connected the Academy sector to the rest of the Alliance. Commercial traffic began reporting severe navigation interference. Freight carriers were losing synchronization signals. Automated defense satellites stopped responding to commands. One by one, systems started failing. The Academy Command Center transformed from calm efficiency into controlled chaos. Officers moved quickly between workstations. Status reports arrived faster than they could be processed. Large holographic displays filled the room with shifting maps and warning indicators. What is causing it? Lyra asked. A communications officer shook his head. We do not know yet. Every diagnostic is returning different results. Another officer turned from his console. The Academy defense grid is experiencing synchronization failures. We cannot guarantee automatic response functions. Lyra stared at the growing cluster of warning icons spreading across the tactical map. The anomaly itself was not the greatest concern. The concern was uncertainty. Nobody understood what they were looking at. Across campus, Ethan Walker was replacing damaged lighting strips inside a maintenance tunnel beneath the engineering complex when his handheld communicator emitted a warning pulse. He glanced at the screen. Emergency traffic. Priority level 7. His expression remained calm. He returned to his work. Above him, command personnel scrambled to regain control of increasingly unstable systems. 30 minutes later, the situation worsened. Cargo vessels began requesting emergency routing assistance. Several navigation beacons went offline completely. The Academy's own orbital monitoring network started dropping connections one after another. The command center grew louder, more tense, more crowded. Lyra studied the incoming data and felt frustration building. Every solution seemed to create new problems. Every recommendation contradicted the previous one. Then an older systems technician quietly spoke from the rear of the room. "Commander." Lyra turned. "What is it?" The technician hesitated. "This pattern feels familiar." "Familiar how?" "I have seen historical simulations of something similar." He pointed toward the display. "An unstable corridor cascade. It resembles the old Black Nebula crisis models." The room fell silent for a moment. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. Black Nebula. The same event connected to Ethan Walker. Before she could respond, another alert appeared. This one larger than all the others. A critical transportation hub near the sector boundary had gone completely dark. The Academy suddenly found itself responsible for coordinating emergency traffic throughout the region. Hundreds of ships, thousands of lives, limited information, failing systems, uncertain outcomes. Lyra looked across the command center as officers exchanged worried glances. Nobody wanted to say it aloud. Nobody wanted to admit it. But the truth hung over the room like a storm cloud. The situation was growing beyond their experience. And somewhere beneath the Academy, a man who had already solved a crisis like this once continued changing light fixtures as if nothing unusual was happening at all. Experience does not announce itself. It waits quietly until everyone else runs out of answers. The command center had been operating under emergency protocols for nearly 6 hours. Warning indicators covered every major display. Traffic controllers struggled to coordinate rerouted ships. Communications officers fought through interference that seemed to spread with every passing minute. The Academy itself remained safe, but the surrounding sector was becoming increasingly unstable. Commander Lyra Voss stood at the center of the room, studying 3 contradictory reports at once. None of them offered a solution. None of them explained why the anomaly continued expanding. The atmosphere inside the command center felt heavier by the minute. Conversations became shorter. Movements became sharper. Every officer understood the same uncomfortable truth. They were reacting instead of leading. Then another alert sounded. A major navigation relay had stopped responding. Several transport convoys immediately requested emergency guidance. The tactical map flickered as new route calculations failed to complete. One of the younger officers exhaled loudly. "We are losing visibility faster than we can replace it." Nobody disagreed. Lyra looked around the room. Brilliant officers, highly trained specialists. Yet every face reflected the same uncertainty. Her thoughts drifted toward a maintenance worker pushing a cart through quiet hallways. It sounded absurd even inside her own head. But the historical records would not leave her alone. Finally, she made a decision. 20 minutes later, Lyra found Ethan Walker inside a utility corridor beneath the engineering wing. He stood atop a small maintenance platform replacing damaged sensor wiring. The air smelled faintly of machine oil and warm circuitry. Overhead fans hummed steadily through the narrow passage. Ethan glanced down as Lyra approached. "Commander, I need your help." Ethan returned his attention to the wiring. "I fix equipment. Plenty of technicians can help. Not with this." For a moment, only the sound of ventilation systems filled the corridor. Ethan finished securing the wiring harness before climbing down from the platform. "What happened?" Lyra explained the anomaly. The relay failures. The corridor instability. The growing confusion inside command. Ethan listened quietly without interruption. His expression revealed almost nothing. When she finished speaking, he asked a single question. "Have they isolated the synchronization source?" Lyra blinked. "No, then they are looking in the wrong place." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" Ethan wiped his hands with a maintenance cloth. "Because the reports are describing a cascade pattern, not a systems failure." Another pause followed. "You recognized it immediately," Lyra said softly. Ethan did not answer. Instead, he walked toward a wall terminal and requested a public status display. Streams of data appeared above the screen. Hundreds of variables, route maps, sensor feeds, communications logs. Ethan studied them for less than 30 seconds. Then he pointed toward a cluster of traffic lanes near the sector boundary. "There." Lyra frowned. "What am I looking at?" "A timing conflict. That is causing all this." No, Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the display. "That is causing everyone to look away from what is causing all this." For the first time since the crisis began, Lyra felt something she had not felt in hours. Clarity. Ethan continued examining the data. Calm. Focused. Completely unaffected by the pressure crushing everyone else. If I am right, he said quietly, the anomaly is not spreading. It only appears to be spreading. Lyra looked at him carefully. Can you prove it? Ethan reached toward the terminal and began entering commands. His fingers moved with the confidence of someone who had performed similar calculations many times before. Across the academy, hidden deep inside encrypted military networks, dormant recognition systems registered a new event. A classified tactical signature had just appeared for the first time in 2 decades. And far beyond the sector, aboard ships scattered across the Alliance, old veterans suddenly stopped what they were doing as a familiar name began appearing on their screens once again. The galaxy had forgotten many things over 20 years, but old soldiers rarely forgot the voice that brought them home. Ethan's hands moved across the terminal with quiet precision while streams of data flowed across the display. Commander Lyra Voss watched the projections reorganize themselves in real time. Navigation routes stabilized. Traffic conflicts separated into recognizable patterns. What had looked like dozens of unrelated failures suddenly began, revealing a single underlying cause. Officers inside the command center stared as system efficiency improved minute by minute. Nobody understood how a maintenance worker was accomplishing in 15 minutes what entire departments had failed to achieve all day. Ethan did not appear impressed. He simply continued working. Redirect civilian traffic through Corridor 8, he said calmly. Reduce synchronization delay by 2.4 seconds. Isolate the relay cluster near Meridian Station. The interference originates there. An operations officer hesitated. How can you be certain? Ethan glanced at the display. Because if it originated anywhere else, the pattern would be symmetrical. The officer blinked, then slowly followed the instructions. 30 seconds later, confirmation arrived. Ethan was correct. Again, around the room, expressions began changing. Confusion gave way to curiosity. Curiosity gave way to disbelief. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away aboard the Alliance cruiser Resolute Dawn, Admiral Marcus Hale sat reviewing fleet logistics when a notification appeared on his command display. His eyes narrowed immediately. The alert contained no emergency designation, no security warning, just a tactical signature, a sequence of calculations, routing methods, predictive traffic modeling. Hale stared at the screen for several seconds before standing. That cannot be possible, he whispered. Nearby officers exchanged confused glances. The Admiral enlarged the data. There was no mistake. He had seen those methods before, 20 years ago, during the worst crisis of his career. Across Alliance space, similar reactions unfolded aboard patrol ships, logistics carriers, command vessels, and exploration cruisers. Veterans paused in the middle of conversations. Fleet commanders interrupted meetings. Retired officers reopened archived files they had not touched in decades. The same question appeared everywhere. Could it really be him? Back at the academy, Lyra stood beside Ethan as reports continued arriving. Every prediction he made proved accurate. Every recommendation stabilized another section of the network. Yet what affected her most was not his intelligence. It was his attitude. No pride. No desire for recognition. No attempt to explain who he was. He behaved exactly as he had while repairing light fixtures, as though solving sector-wide emergencies was simply another task on today's maintenance schedule. Why did you leave? Lyra finally asked. Ethan remained focused on the display. People move on. That is not an answer. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. It is the only one that matters. Before Lyra could respond, the command center speakers activated. A communications officer looked up suddenly. Commander, we are receiving priority transmissions. From whom? The officer swallowed. Multiple Alliance fleet groups. The room grew silent. New icons began appearing across the tactical display. One ship, then another, then 10 more, then dozens. Military vessels from sectors scattered across known space were establishing direct communication links with the Academy. Nobody had requested assistance. Nobody had issued a summons. Yet the connections continued multiplying. Officers exchanged bewildered looks. Ethan quietly stepped back from the terminal. For the first time all day, uncertainty crossed his face. On the main display, incoming messages stacked faster than the system could organize them. Most contained only a single line. We have received the Walker signature. Awaiting instructions. Recognition travels faster than any ship ever built because memory does not need engines. The command center stood frozen as incoming transmissions continued flooding the network. Dozens became hundreds. Fleet identifiers from distant sectors appeared across the tactical display. Supply groups, exploration vessels, patrol squadrons, Command ships. Some were operating thousands of light years away. Others were officially retired from service. Yet somehow they had all responded to the same signal. Commander Lyra Voss watched officers struggle to manage the avalanche of communications. How are they even receiving this information? One lieutenant asked. Nobody sent a fleet-wide alert. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Ethan stood quietly near the terminal where he had stabilized the crisis. His maintenance uniform looked strangely out of place beneath the glow of strategic command displays. Around him, officers whispered among themselves. Some now recognized the name. Others were searching historical databases as quickly as possible. Every new search revealed another fragment of a forgotten legacy. Then a transmission request arrived marked Priority 1. The room immediately fell silent. The source identifier appeared across the central screen. Alliance flagship Resolute Dawn. Admiral Marcus Hale himself. Lyra authorized the connection. The holographic image flickered into existence. An older human officer appeared above the command table. Silver hair, weathered face, eyes that had spent decades staring into the darkness between stars. The moment he saw Ethan, the Admiral stopped speaking. For several seconds, he simply looked at him. The room remained completely silent. Finally, Hale exhaled. It really is you. Ethan lowered his eyes slightly. Hello, Marcus. Several officers nearly dropped their tablets. Nobody addressed a serving admiral by first name. Nobody except someone who had known him long before the rank existed. Hale shook his head slowly. Do you have any idea what happened when your tactical signature appeared? Ethan offered a faint smile. I was hoping nobody would notice. The Admiral laughed quietly. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. Half the Alliance noticed. More communication requests continued arriving. Another fleet commander appeared. Then another. Then another. One after another. Some were alien officers. Some were human. Some had served under Ethan. Others had simply studied his work. Yet every conversation carried the same tone. Respect. Gratitude. Recognition. No politics. No accusations. No discussion of old controversies. Only respect. Outside the Academy, Orbital Traffic Control suddenly reported unusual activity. Lyra turned toward the updated display. Her eyes widened. Ships were changing course. Not dozens. Hundreds. Across multiple sectors, military vessels were altering schedules and redirecting toward the Academy's location. They were not responding to an emergency order. They were coming voluntarily. Hours passed. The anomaly crisis gradually stabilized under Ethan's guidance. Navigation systems recovered. Traffic corridors reopened. Communication relays returned to normal operation. The danger faded, yet the ships kept coming. By evening, Academy observation decks filled with cadets, instructors, and staff. Everyone stared upward through the massive, transparent dome. Bright engine signatures appeared against the darkness. Then more. Then hundreds more. The stars themselves seemed to be moving. Entire formations entered orbit with perfect discipline. No speeches accompanied their arrival. No official announcement explained their presence. They simply came. One ship after another. One commander after another. As if answering a call nobody had spoken aloud. Beside the observation window, Lyra looked toward Ethan. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed uncertain. Not afraid. Just overwhelmed by something he had never expected to see again. Around the Academy, people who had once laughed at a quiet maintenance worker now stood staring at the sky, realizing that an entire generation of officers had never forgotten his name. The people who change history rarely realize how many lives continue carrying their influence long after they are gone. Night settled over the Orion Naval Academy beneath a sky crowded with ships. Hundreds of vessels held position above the station in perfect formation. Their navigation lights shimmered across the transparent dome like a second constellation. Every observation deck was full. Cadets stood shoulder to shoulder beside instructors. Maintenance workers stood beside admirals. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening. Inside the central parade hall, the same hall where laughter had once echoed only days before, a special assembly had been called. No speeches had been scheduled. No ceremony had been planned. Yet thousands gathered anyway. Ethan Walker stood near the rear of the room, wearing the same gray maintenance uniform he had worn for 14 years. Nothing about him had changed. The hall had. Commander Lyra Voss watched from the front as officers from across the Alliance entered one after another. Human, alien, young, old. Fleet commanders whose names appeared in history books. Admirals responsible for entire sectors. Distinguished veterans long retired from service. They crossed the hall quietly. No fanfare. No dramatic announcements. One by one they took their places. Then Admiral Marcus Hale stepped forward. The room fell silent. He looked across the crowd before turning toward Ethan. 20 years ago, Hale said, his voice carrying through the enormous chamber, millions of people survived because one officer chose responsibility over reputation. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. History recorded the controversy. It recorded the politics. It recorded the criticism. What it failed to record was gratitude. Hale stepped aside. Behind him, every visiting commander rose to their feet. Then every officer in the hall stood as well. The movement spread through the room like a wave. Thousands of people rising together. Ethan looked genuinely uncomfortable. He shifted slightly, as if searching for a way to avoid the attention. There was none. Hale raised his hand in a formal fleet salute. Instantly, hundreds of officers mirrored the gesture. Then thousands more followed. Across orbit, every ship opened synchronized communication channels. Observation screens throughout the Academy activated simultaneously. Bridge crews appeared from vessel after vessel. Men and women from dozens of worlds. Entire crews standing at attention. Saluting. Not because regulations demanded it. Not because rank required it. Because respect did. Silence filled the hall. A deep, meaningful silence. Ethan stared at the screens. At the faces. At the people who remembered. For a moment his eyes reflected emotions he had hidden for decades. Not pride. Relief. The burden he had carried alone no longer belonged only to him. Finally Ethan returned the salute. Nothing more. No speech. No defense. No explanation. The gesture lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow it felt larger than any ceremony the Academy had ever hosted. Much later, after the ships began departing and the crowd slowly dispersed, Ethan found himself alone in the hall once again. Empty chairs stretched beneath dimmed lights. The echoes of the day had faded. Near the stage sat a maintenance cart waiting where he had left it. Ethan walked over, picked up a mop, and quietly resumed cleaning the floor. Outside, stars drifted across the darkness. Inside, the man who had once carried the weight of an entire generation returned to work. Because recognition had never been what mattered. Service was. And sometimes the greatest measure of a person is not how many remember their name, but how much good they continue doing after the world forgets it.